Don't envy what someone has because you don't know the price that they've paid.
Welcome to the Get Invested podcast, where we share great conversations with experts from all walks of life to uncover their secret know-how on where they invest their time, their skills and their money, and the benefits that this has created. You see, the truth is that everyone invests. Every minute of every day, we're investing our time, our skills, our energy and our money in something. Some of us are investing consciously, some unconsciously, sometimes for good, sometimes for bad, and sometimes for no impact. Get Invested will help you to start living by design, not by default. I'm going to help you to make it happen, not let it happen. You'll hear the top tips on how you can live with conscious intent so that you can live more, work less, and leave a living legacy by investing now. Listen to the show to discover the top tips on how to get started, make the most of your investment journey, and ultimately to be living your dream, not someone else's. More episodes can be found on iTunes or at bushymartin.com.au/get invested. Thanks for listening, and now let's get invested. Hi, Freedom Fighters. How often have you caught yourself looking at others and saying, I wish I had their life. They've got it so good and they're just so lucky. Now, we're all guilty of it. The grass always looks greener from afar on the other side. And these envious thoughts and comments are often directed to people who we perceive as successful. And our tall poppy syndrome, which has become somewhat of a national sport, means we're often subconsciously trying to find fault or lessen their success by putting their apparent good fortune down to luck. Well, in my experience of studying success now for well over 35 years, luck has absolutely nothing to do with it. You only get lucky when you've worked hard enough for long enough so that perspiration and preparation are ready to meet opportunity. Inevitably, so-called overnight success is always 15 to 20 years in the making. So what does it really take to become successful? Do you have to risk it all? How do you endure the relentless risks and all-consuming, ever-present pressure and stress to survive and then thrive? Well, today's guest, Sheree Sullivan, is perfectly positioned to show you how real sustainable success has and can be achieved and what it takes to make it. You see, Sheree and her family have gone from part-time, after-hours, side hustle startup of their Udder Delights artisan cheese business in an industry they knew absolutely nothing about 20 years ago, to an award-winning global brand with a team of 50 staff serving a multi-faceted end-to-end customer ecosystem that has recently attracted joint ownership investment of over $14 million from a Japanese conglomerate. Oh, how lucky are they, I hear you say. Well, if only it were that easy. But the truth tells a very different story, one which most people would not have even survived. And Sheree is just the person to share it with you. Now, during our very insightful and wide-ranging discussion, she gives you answers to all of the important questions that include things like, are entrepreneurs born or bred? If you're called unemployable, is that an insult or a compliment? How do you successfully go into business with your parents and your partner? What is the best way to make decisions if you are partners in business as well as in life? And how do you manage having babies with business? What's the key focus that will drive your success in any endeavour? And why is the concept of seasons important to enduring the journey and achieving success? How do you keep yourself calm in very stressful situations? And what do mental shelves and open doors have to do with goal setting? So now sit back and enjoy this great conversation with the savvy and the sassy Sheree Sullivan. Hi, Freedom Fighters. Now, today I could be excused for letting my really cheesy sense of humour take over, but I'm not going to embarrass myself any more than I normally do, nor insult my special guest who has heard it all before. So by way of introduction, I'll keep it really short and sweet. You see, last year I had the pleasure of attending an executive roundtable event where today's guest spoke very, very generally, and she had all of us spellbound. And it was by the genuine vulnerability and openness that she spoke about her long and arduous roller coaster ride to success. And I knew straight away she'd be the perfect guest on Get Invested. So welcome aboard, Sheree Sullivan.
Thank you.
Sheree, really pleased that you can spend some time with us today. Let's kick off by just letting the audience know who you are and what you do, if you don't mind, please.
Sure. So I'm the Chief Executive of Udder Delights Australia, and we are artisanal cheesemakers in the Adelaide Hills. And we also have a cellar-door sort of food tourism outlet in Harndorf, and I have been doing that as a startup business for 20 years now.
Awesome. Let's dig in a little bit deeper to why you do what you do.
Sure. I always think that if MasterChef was around when I was growing up, I would have said to myself and to everyone else, I'm going to work in the food industry. But it wasn't. But I loved food from a really, really young age, but I had just never even thought, okay, one day I'm going to work in food. So that when the opportunity presented with my parents, I just loved it. I really love the food industry and I really love business. So I definitely found my sweet spot by falling into it.
Yeah, okay. Well, let's go right back there because I'd like you to take us on your journey so far. And I'd like you just to sort of take us through the entire journey, if you don't mind, and focus on what you've invested your time, your interests, your skills and your money into over that journey and why, if you can.
Sure.
Please.
So this is quite a long story.
Great.
So feel free to interrupt and ask questions as we go.
We like good stories, so it's all yours.
Whenever I get asked, how did you start? So, oh my gosh, you have like 5 to 10 minutes.
Great, you do. You've got the floor.
Yeah, and we do today, so that's good. I guess our story and our business journey began, it actually began from a really young age, to be honest. I grew up in a family that always had businesses on the side. And I look back now and go and realise that it set me up to have a go and not to be afraid of failure and not to start a business and shut down a business because my parents did it all the time. Okay. So I guess that's a bit of background. And then when I was 18, my parents decided they were moving our family to the Adelaide Hills on a 33-acre, I remember, easterly facing slope and good bore water.
That was the ad, was it?
I had no idea what that meant.
Just winding back, where were you before that, just so you set the context?
I was born and bred in Elizabeth until I was 18.
Okay.
And so I often joke you can take the girl out of Elizabeth, but you can't take Elizabeth out of the girl. So, and it shaped me, and it certainly shaped some of my, I guess, life and business philosophy, but we can get to that later. Yeah. So we end up in Lobethal. So my parents had done a whole stack of research and they were going to work full time in the city and commute and then start a raspberry farm on the weekends.
Wow.
And that was going to be their long-term retirement plan because they'd nearly paid off their house, but they had no super. So they were always risk takers. And I think to their face, their friends would have thought they probably would have said that's really super exciting, wow, amazing. And then behind their back, I'm sure they were just saying they're mad and they're going, yeah.
What were their day jobs, Sheree?
So my mum was always working in some sort of office administration role. Yeah. And quite good at managing finances. So at that point in time, she was working at Port Adelaide. So she was commuting from Lobethal to Port Adelaide.
Good grief.
My dad, quite an interesting career, and it was a bevy of things. And it was a tech studies teacher, a maths teacher, a truck driver, a bricklayer, a fiberglasser, a fabricator, speed car builder, aeroplane builder, aerobatics instructor, and then ended up as a corporate jet pilot before he retired.
Good grief.
Yeah. So if you said to him, what did he want to do his whole life? It was flying.
Okay.
And he always did that throughout this journey. So, again, I sort of think I just grew up with random, but when it's your normal, you don't realise.
Yeah.
So my dad's commuting from Lobethal to Parafield at this point and was flying miners all around South Australia.
Okay.
And I'm at uni now. I'm living with my grandparents during the week, coming home on the weekends, and we have just animals to help keep the grass down. And there was a rundown dairy on the property, and even in Elizabeth, because we had quite a large block, my dad wanted goats. We never got them, but he just wanted them because his cousins had them, so he knew how cool they were and how delicious the goat milk was. So my mum and dad decided we're going to get 2 goats for family use. They were Nora and Nell, and they were a mother-daughter goat milking team.
Yep.
And my mum made some goat coats, and my dad welded up some milking stands, and they tidied up the dairy, and then we just milked morning and night for family. And then we realised that goats eat raspberry cuttings, so there was this synergy, and there was the paddocks and the fences were there, and the dairy was there. So my parents were like, why don't we start a goat dairy? That will be all year round income. They'll eat the raspberry cuttings. Goats will be seasonal income.
And they're doing this, so they're milking the goats at 4 o'clock in the morning before they're heading off to work.
Exactly.
Every day. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, and I'm yet to find a dairy farmer who works full-time in the city.
Oh,
so that's what they were doing. They were working so hard. And that's, I think that's the ethic of my family. It's you work hard.
Yeah.
And then it was really hard to sell the goat milk. So this is sort of, 97, 98 to give perspective. And we had one main customer who wouldn't always take the milk. So sometimes it was literally going down the paddock, being poured out. And then one day my dad took the milk and they just said, oh, Trevor, next week we dropped the price of goat milk by 10 cents a litre. And so that was sort of the catalyst. He just came home and had a chat with mum, and they just decided they were going to value add. They needed shelf life. They needed control. Why don't we build a cheese factory?
Wow.
So this wasn't, we're so gourmet, we love goat cheese. This is, there's no financial backup plan.
Yeah.
You have no money left.
Yeah.
Let's keep going. So
Hey,
you get...
Just to put some context around this, 10 cents a litre less was of how much? What are we talking?
Goat's milk get a lot more than cow's milk. So to this day, we are paying, I think, $1.38 a litre for goat milk.
Wow.
So to give you perspective, so at retail you're probably paying $4 to $6 a litre for goat milk.
Yep.
So back then, I can't remember, maybe it was $1.15 and we went to $1.05, but we were already not making money at $1.15, you know what I mean? So,
Yep.
And so because my parents can literally build with their hands, on the smell of an oily rag, they built a tiny little cheese factory at the old woolen mills in Lobethal. And this was a really interesting site. We're there to this day, but it's one of the only industrial sites in the Adelaide Hills. And when it shut down, which it was a big woolen blanket factory, it was the equivalent of Holden shutting down, in Elizabeth. So the really cool thing is today it now employs more people than it did when it was an old woolen mill.
Awesome.
So I think that's pretty cool.
Very cool.
So we're one of the businesses there, and they built a tiny, tiny little factory by leasing a warehouse and fitting it out with cool room material.
Yep.
I remember my brother thought of the name Udder Delights. He was cherry picking at the time up a tree, went Udder Delights, and my parents thought that was a good name. I can't claim any fame to any of that.
It's a great name.
Yeah, and then they did all the initial branding. They employed a cheesemaker, and there was a very soft opening and launch into the marketplace at the end of 1998. Okay. And I remember driving home and my car broke down. I remember that, and I don't know how I made it the rest of the way, but I got there. And then that's the whole class. So by now my parents are employing a cheesemaker. It's just a black hole for money. You just put money in and it disappears, never to be seen again.
I bet.
And I said to my parents at that time, I thought, you know what, why don't I get out and market your product? Because nothing was selling, nothing.
Yeah, I'm very keen to jump in there because you did a music degree at Adelaide Uni, focusing on jazz piano.
Yes.
Now, let's just wind back a little bit. Why go from high school to doing jazz piano? What was the What were you investing in there?
I was investing in I don't know what to do.
I love it.
I guess I had been a musician from age 5.
Yep.
My parents didn't have a lot of money, but I always remember they had money for music and dentistry. So I had orthodontics and music lessons.
Great teeth and you could tinkle the ivories.
Yeah, and so I had a natural aptitude for music and was also very disciplined. So you need both.
Yep.
And so by the time I was in year 12, I wasn't quite sure what to do. My mum was so practical. She just wanted me to go to business college so I could just go get a job straight away being a receptionist. I remember driving, and then I remember, so I went to a private school out in Gawler, actually the largest school now in the state, so Trinity College.
Yeah.
And they based their prefect captain system on St. Peter's. And so I was asked to come back as college captain in year 13 on scholarship.
Okay.
And I had to defer a university course. And I can't even remember what one I applied for, but I didn't bother, I think, at that time applying for music. I can't remember. And in year 13, I was going to oversee the school and finish a licentiate diploma on modern organ. And then I remember driving down Main North Road. I remember my mum and dad being in the front seat. And I said to them, I think I want to go to uni. And my mum, who just was so practical and rational, was like, what do you want to go to uni for? Like, that was actually what she said.
Yep.
And my dad just said, Estelle, if Sheree wants to go to uni, she can go to uni. And that was the end of the conversation. And like, it's so funny because most parents are sending their kids to private school so they go to uni, whereas there was just freedom. And I think I realise now that conversation was that one sentence by my dad was whatever you choose to do is fine. So,
Awesome.
So I went on to do jazz piano because I was really good at it. And
now,
nothing else.
Just let me share with the audience, because I'm a closet muso myself.
Yeah.
And I wouldn't even attempt to do jazz piano because not only is it very creative, it's spontaneous, it's adaptive. You've got to be totally flexible and respond to all of the other instruments that you're playing with. It's, I reckon, the most challenging way to play piano, and jazz generally is. But as you said, what comes behind that is a absolute discipline, because if you don't know the instrument so well that you can intuitively respond to what everyone else is doing, then it's going to fall very flat. So where did that passion for music come from, Sheree?
My whole family is musical. Every single cousin I have plays something.
Awesome.
And my brother, the family, they were just a really musical family. We all grew up in church as well, which essentially meant pick up an instrument and play it. And I remember my mum gave me a little toy piano, a tiny, tiny toy piano when I was about 5. And I used the colour-coded music to learn the toy piano, and then I translated that to her organ. And she's like, okay, it's time for lessons.
Awesome.
So, but the other thing is my favourite subject at school was actually maths.
Wow.
Loved maths. And
Why?
Why? Because 1 + 1 = 2.
Yeah.
And in music, it's not always like that, particularly jazz. And a lot of the other subjects I was doing were so subjective that I just loved that there was one answer in maths. And I know the higher you get, there are more creative answers in maths. But
sure.
I realise now that I've got the maths music brain, which is the rational creative.
So you got both sides of the brain working extremely
and
well.
That's what's worked really well for me as an entrepreneur.
Of course.
Yeah, so I got through the jazz degree on my brain. The really, really talented musicians who are professional musicians to this day, I think, get through on their ear.
Right.
Do you know what I mean? They just get through because they instinctively know what they should play.
Yeah.
I was going, okay, that's a C13 sharp 4. I have to play the Lydian mode over that. You know what I mean? Like my brain was going, just to keep up. Except rhythmically, I just felt that instinctively. So, so I do absolutely realise it taught me discipline. And I realised that I was only thinking about it today, maybe in preparation as your talk, but I've never really thought about it before. But I realised that every year I like to learn something new.
Yep.
And that's change, and that forces your brain to change and grow. And I would say that most adults don't really enjoy that because it's not comfortable. But I realise now that till I was 21, when I finished my degree, it was for 15 or 16 years of my life, it was constantly, here's a new piece of music, go and learn it. And it was just that constant thing, here's a new thing, read it, study it, practice it, perfect it. So, I just do that all the time, I guess, now, and I just like it.
What part does music, if any, play in your life now then?
It is relaxation now. To be honest, I don't get on the piano very often. My daughters are now getting on. But we'll talk later about when I was going through due diligence, which was the most stressful professional time of my life.
Yeah.
I just had albums playing in the background, certain albums. I'm a massive believer of music really getting into your subconscious. I use it very much as a mood setter for different things.
Same here. My half an hour a day on the piano is I get off with a massive smile on my face. It's the best mood changer.
Yeah.
If I'm having a stressful day, I'll just walk downstairs, jump on the piano for 10 or 15 minutes and get off and I'm ready.
If I've got the time, mine is opposite. Mine is now let me in the kitchen.
Yeah.
So my husband loves it. I find it quite therapeutic as well.
Well, on the outside, someone say, how do you go from jazz piano into building a business? But if you look at the underlying fundamentals there, the creativity, the discipline that you bring to that craft, your persistence, the flexibility and your ability to respond to the situation, and it is all pretty foundational to building that. So that makes sense now. So sorry, I went off on a rabbit hole.
No, you're right.
We sort of come back in then. So mum and dad have, with their blood, sweat and tears, have started to build this cheese factory.
Just finished my degree. I said, look, I'm going to teach music, I'm going to perform, and then how about I get out there and market your product, just put me on commission. And they were like, yep, great. And so I did rebrand very early on. And branding to me is something that has come quite instinctively. And I remember I went to a bottle shop because I thought if any industry has done any colour combo or feel, it's the wine industry. So I stood in front of all these bottles for an hour or two and worked out what I wanted, and then built the logo and all the branding from that. And I think a lot of the time a number's sort of thrown around that to build a brand, or even to just get your design concept, is anywhere cheap is about $5,000 up to $10,000, and I did Udder Delights for about $500.
Love it.
And then I went out to the shops and I just had to learn, I guess, who they were and what suits what we're doing. But essentially I said to the shop owners, I've got this goat cheese from the Adelaide Hills. Why don't you take it on consignment? So if they didn't sell it, they didn't pay for it.
Yeah, love it. And great concept.
It just required some bookkeeping from my side to keep track of everything.
Yep.
And then so it was they weren't going to lose, and you need presence in a shelf. Like in retail, you need presence to be seen. Yeah. And so that was a really good way of getting presence.
Yeah. Love it. And no one else would have been doing it at that time either.
No, I don't think anyone does consignment on food. And then I just did lots and lots of demos. I just had to get out there with my little table and get cheese into people's mouths. And it probably sounds odd, like why would you have to do that? And that's because this was 1999, 2000, 2001. And goat cheese wasn't normal. No. It wasn't in restaurants. It wasn't in menu. You just didn't see it in recipes. And now goat cheese, halloumi, chorizo are all pretty much well up there and recognisable, and what I think part of the Australian food landscape.
Totally agree. And you've pioneered that change in flavour too, I'm hearing. Hey, just jumping in there, Sheree, one of the things that, again, I admire looking from the outside in is that very few people are able to make a family business a success. And Talk to us around the comfort level, or it may not have even been a second thought for you, but I'll be interested in why you felt comfortable saying, yeah, Mum and Dad, I'm in, I'll make this happen. Because to give you an example, in my own case, I end up being very much like my father, who was a workaholic for many years. But my response to seeing that was, I'm not going to work for you, Dad. I know you want me to, but I'm not, because I don't want to end up like you. I ended up being that way from a different route, so I probably would have been better off working for him. But talk me through your thinking at that time.
Yeah, well, I think what it was is that while I started it with Mum and Dad had been involved, say, 6 months to a year prior, but there was actually no business as such. It was all that time setting up.
Yeah.
So while I'm technically second generation and their daughter, I was actually first generation setting up the business. So there was nothing that my parents were really handing to me in terms of systems or customer base, or you must do it this way.
Mm-hmm.
It was more like, have a go, you know what I mean? So I actually, there was nothing there to make me even think for a minute, don't do this. If anything, it was, I need to do this or we're going broke.
Okay. That's a pretty good driver. And
do you know what I mean?
Yeah. That makes complete sense. Yeah.
And it's not as if I had anything else to do anyway. I just finished my degree. I even went to my degree knowing I didn't want to be a music teacher. I knew that I didn't.
Okay. Yeah.
So I just realised it was just the perfect time.
Yeah.
It was this business waiting for me, ready to go when I finished my degree. So, hey,
I know I keep distracting you,
but it's good. I like it.
Yeah, what I'm hearing from yourself and through your father is this limitless, fearless approach. It's almost for someone the little bit you said about your dad. He's prepared to have a crack at anything, and he'll make it work. Is that sort of part of the culture that you grew up with that sort of sustained you in the journey so far?
I think so, but it wasn't so much my dad. It was probably more my dad would come up with this big idea and my mum would go, okay, let's do that. Okay. And I think there were 3 or 4 times that my dad said, we need to shut down, we can't keep doing this. And my mum was the one who said, no, we're going to keep going. So, it was her, they were both really good risk takers, because you can't, I'm a very big believer in, you cannot be an entrepreneur with a family business if both of you are not fully comfortable with the risk taken or the time sacrifice required. And so they both were. They were an awesome team, and I have married similarly. So and also, a guy who grew up with his dad starting businesses all the time and not particularly successful at all. However, there is then no pressure from your family to go become a doctor or a lawyer, or it's actually fully acceptable to have a go at something and it not work.
Yeah, awesome. Yeah, that's thanks for sharing that. That's really important, I think, because the environment that you're operating in does have a big impact on how you think and therefore behave. And if there's the freedom there to say, right, well, we're just going to do this.
Yeah.
Then that's a great incubator. Awesome.
Yeah.
No, sorry. So go on.
Yep. All right. So just got out there, did lots of demos, started getting some sales. The media were really interested in the story. Probably 21-year-old jazz pianist, cheese, selling goat cheese. And then within 6 months, the cheesemaker went on holidays and asked if I would come in and make the cheese in his absence. And I had about 8 hours training with him, and I just think that's so ridiculous when I look back. And I so many things about this story, I just think that is so ridiculous. And I'm just so glad that I was young and naive. So I'm like, sure, 8 hours is enough. And I just learned how to make the fresh cheese, thank goodness. Yep. And when he went, I was then cheesemaker for 2 to 3 weeks, really enjoyed it. And I guess I approached it like cooking, and I also knew it would help me sell the product better. So he returned, and within a month or 2, my parents went down to the factory one night after milking, And it was just a note that said, I resign. And so we didn't have a cheesemaker. We had no financial backup plan. Risk management was non-existent, which is a good thing, or we wouldn't have done it.
Yep.
And so I remember sitting around the dinner table that night, and I said to my parents, look, how about I become the cheesemaker, and I'm going to teach myself how to make cheese, trial and error. I'll read books. I've got this guy I can call in Melbourne, and just put me on a really small hourly rate. I reckon I was probably on like $15 or $18 an hour.
Yep.
And then the rest of the time I'm going to get out there and I'm going to set up this business and I'm going to get the sales, I'm going to get profit, I'll brand it, and that can be commission based on sales. And I'm going to give you a 5-year commitment. And at the end of 5 years, I'll recommit again, or I will look elsewhere for a job. And at that point, they just went, okay. So that was, I guess, a door that opened for me. In my parents' despair, I just thought, okay, I'm going to have a go. And I just look back now and go, if someone was telling me what they're about to embark on with my skill set and my background, and that they were naive enough to even think it would be around in 5 years to recommit, I would just think they were delusional.
But here's what I love. Here's what I'm hearing here is, I mean, necessity is the driver of invention. There's no doubt about it. So you're looking at each other going, we don't have too many choices. You're brave enough to put up your hand. You're making it no risk to mum and dad by saying, well, pay me a measly amount and the sales is on commission. So there's while you're part of the family, there's no major risk then. But you're also putting a timeline on it. You're saying, okay, well, let's put an end date on this so that we know what we're working towards, and that becomes the major decision point. Until then, we're just going to go hard. And that even that thinking, Sheree, is quite rare. There's very few people would be able to. Where did that sort of ability to think that way come from? Is that just intuitive? Or?
I don't know. I just think intuitive. I do think. I'm yet to see an entrepreneur who wasn't born an entrepreneur. Yeah. And you've got to skill yourself, and you have to develop yourself. But I just sort of think it's there, and it can be fostered or not fostered. I do remember quite a few years ago watching good old, The Voice, that competition, and I had a bit of one of those and you just sort of learn about yourself moments. But essentially, there was this great singer. And she said, so what I'm doing, my backup plan is this, blah, 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 blah. And I went, that's really smart. And one of the judges had a complete go at her for having a backup plan. And I was like, that is really unfair. I think you're being really unfair. And, like you literally sleep on something and your subconscious works stuff out overnight. The next morning I woke up and I went, and I realised that we were successful because we had no backup plan. And therefore, you keep going and you keep going and you keep going because the option is not good.
Love it. Absolutely. The necessity. You've got to make it work. There is no alternative. Yeah. A lot of people don't appreciate that. That's awesome.
So in terms of that 5 years, we followed the pattern of a small business, which is first 3 years you run at loss, year 4 you cut even, year 5 is your first small profit.
Were you thinking that? Were you thinking that at the time, or is that something you thought about afterwards?
I had no idea. I only learnt about it when I started training myself in business, and I learnt that 1 in 10 survive. And we were that. And the truth is that I just continued to learn and change. And I was because I'm in the Adelaide Hills, I was able to plug into the Regional Development Board, who had sort of all sorts of mentoring programs. I just kept trying to plug into those, and I chose to change and learn, and to this day. And then when in year 5, we stopped milking goats and we started buying milk in, and that was really my parents just weren't sleeping enough. It wasn't healthy, but it meant we didn't have to buy milk in those early years. And the other thing is I married my husband, so his name is Saul, and he was really entrepreneurial, really into food and wine. And when we got married, what was really interesting is I put all the bonbonniere everywhere, and on it typed up Sullivan Synergy and the meaning of what synergy meant. And it's just so interesting that that has just played out in our life, that what we can achieve together just so far surpasses the sum of what it would have been achieved by ourselves. So we are a really good team.
Awesome.
So he came into the business at that point. We went to mum and dad and asked if we could buy any. And at that point, they sold 50% of the cheese factory to us.
Okay.
And we meaning Saul and I, just continued to work in the business and run it. I started teaching Saul everything I knew about cheese making. My mum and dad are still working full-time elsewhere. My mum did all the bookwork and my dad did a lot of the maintenance and construction, because we were always growing, and that meant the site had to grow.
Yeah.
And just maintenance, because you're always working with water and plumbing and electricity and pumps, and it's just constant keeping it maintained. And then Saul said to me a lot, you're really good at food. Don't you want to open up a food establishment? And I just kept saying, no. And then we were at a workshop one day, and the facilitator said, look, if I had a piggery, I wouldn't just want the best bacon. I would want the best shop selling the best bacon and eggs for breakfast. And so, again, I just had that light bulb moment, slept on it, and dreamt up this food tourism complex, and just didn't say anything to Saul, because he would wake up every day with a new business idea, and I was just like, no, bad idea, no. And then one day,
you were the Estelle of your father's exercise. Yeah, okay.
Yes. And then one day he woke up and said, I've got this business idea, blah, 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 blah. And it was this food tourism concept, which I had been sitting on for about 2 months. And so I went, yes. So he fell off his chair because, I agreed. And then we had to go about starting this new business and what that was going to look like and where that was. So that was a site we found in Harndorf. It was just this beautiful hobby build, just someone building for fun, a 3-year project. And I found that site and said to my husband, I found it, let's go look at it. And he is I'm a big thinker. He's a ridiculously big thinker. And when I showed him this site, he actually said to me, you've lost it. There is no way we can afford that. So it was really interesting that the tables turned for once. Anyway, that was like 14 years ago now. So we sold our house and one of our cars to fund the Udder Delights cheese cellar.
Wow.
And we did that as a different business structure to the Udder Delights cheese factory. So the cellar door is owned solely by Saul and I, and it had to buy off the cheese factory. So we sort of likened it to a income generating marketing arm of the business.
Yeah, smart. Very smart. And you can then keep an eye on the numbers so they didn't blur, and you can understand what was working, what wasn't. Hey, just winding back a little bit to when yourself and Saul got together. The decision for Saul to come on board with the business, was it a decision, or was it just assumed when you got together that he would do that? I'd be interested in that conversation, that thinking, and then moving forward from there, why you work so well. You talked about the synergy, but I'd like to dig into that a little bit. And what some of the challenges been between working together and living together? Yeah,
so it's odd. We never really had this discussion about, do you want to join the business or not? It just was a given. It was bizarre because I've never really thought about it, to be honest. He always joked that if he wanted to go on a date with me, he'd have to come on a cheese tasting.
Good excuse.
I think he knew.
Yeah.
But he was just so entrepreneurial anyway, so absolutely would have, ticked all the boxes for him.
Yeah.
I think he knew if he was ever going to see me, he'd have to work with me.
Yeah.
He also, though, had business from when he was age 15. So he had a firewood delivery business from age 15, and I think he is pretty unemployable. And my dad even said to me 2 or 3 years in, you're the most unemployable person I know. And I was so offended.
But he's actually complimenting you, really.
Yeah, because I was one of the hardest working people I know.
Yeah.
But it was his way of saying, the constraints wouldn't be good for you. And that's the same for my husband as well.
Yeah.
It was just this real natural thing. And
well, talk me through, I mean, there would have been, given you're both obviously quite strong personalities and very creative and big.
Yeah,
how have you negotiated that? Because I see a lot of likenesses with myself and my awesome wife, Sonia. How have you is it just something that's sort of taken shape by ebbs and flows, or walk me through the journey there if you can?
We have a rule. And I don't remember when we set the rule, but it was very early. And it was, if we don't both agree, then we don't do it.
Love it.
So, and that's about the really big things. I'm now not involved in daily operations of the cheese making, and I will never interfere other than if something's hit the fan or whatever and Saul just rings me. I'm often the what would you call it? The phone a friend. The person who knows enough about the business from afar to provide a bit of perspective or a different thought process. So I'm often called in crisis and can help find a resolution.
So that separation of roles then, because what I'm hearing there is you've decided, right, you're responsible for that, I'm responsible for this. When did that occur? Because quite often partners, there's a real blurring, and that's where it comes to grief, because one starts telling the other and vice versa, and before you know it, implodes.
Look, when the business was small and we were both working at the cheese factory with, say, 3 staff, that was, I think, in my opinion, that was the hardest time of working and being married, because you're in such small confines with a pretty small patch to manage.
Yeah.
And then you'd go home at the end of the day and there was nothing to talk about because you'd been together all day. So a really good turning point was when I physically left the factory and started the cellar door in a different location and then worked remotely for the factory because, internet and online. That was a really good turning point. But the business as it's just gotten bigger, you have to divide up roles. And I'm a very big advocate of carving off your role. So when you start, you have to know how to do everything, and you have to do everything because you actually can't afford the help anyway.
Yep.
But the minute you can afford some help, you carve off what you hate the most. And that's sort of how we've done it and continue to find the niches we want to work in.
Yes. Yeah. You play to your strengths and get someone to fill the weaknesses. Yeah. Love it. Yeah, perfect.
Yeah.
Yeah, awesome. Okay. So, the synergies are great. I love the word synergy because it's, 1 + 1 = 3.
Yeah.
Is that what you mean by your synergy? Can you sort of expand on what synergy means to you and Saul?
Yeah, absolutely. I just wouldn't like being in business by myself. And I know that if Saul hadn't come on, Udder Delights wouldn't be the business it is today. So I just really like being in business with someone, and my husband's actually the same. He would not be great by himself.
Yep.
And I think we fill each other's, we're both very strong generally across areas. But there's some areas specifically that we are really good at, and generally they complement each other. So, and of course, when one's down, the other's up, and vice versa. So it's just, we just work well together. And it doesn't mean that over the years we haven't had to have some pretty honest conversations with each other about, when you say this to me like that, that hurts my feelings. Still have to have those conversations.
Of course.
Yeah, but.
And what about because this is something that, it continues to be something that Sonia and I work on, because all of us, without even thinking about it, talk differently to our partners than they would if they were an employee or someone else. Yeah. And even the tone and the way you say things sometimes you can come across. And if you're in an environment where you're with other people, they'll pick that up.
Yeah.
How have you managed that?
I think most of the time, Saul and I actually talk to each other differently than the staff. We're gentler with each other.
Yeah.
But every now and then we're not. And What's really funny is that our general manager used to be the national sales manager for Maggie and Colin Beer.
Oh, yeah.
And now he's the general manager for Saul and Sheree Sullivan. So he has just been, I reckon, the meat in the sandwich for a long time, and he's just used to it. But in saying that, when I say the meat in the sandwich, I am joking in that we never, ever put anyone in between us. If there's an issue, it's what we work out together. But, if anything, my husband is very strong, and sometimes I think the staff actually need me to just call him on it and just go, stop being, pig-headed about this, blah, 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 blah. And the others are going, here. But I'm the only one probably who can say it at times. So, I guess it's just worked. But in saying that, over the years, there have been some quite honest conversations between Saul and I about when we have these situations, this is how we can successfully navigate that in a way that we won't offend each other.
Love that. How do you switch off, or do you switch off? Is it just become part of the fabric of who you are and you talk about it whenever, or do you have rules around, okay, when we're at home, we're at home, and when we're at work, we're at work? How do you negotiate that one?
So we had no rules, and I know we'll get to it and talk to it because now our business looks really different with the investment.
Yeah.
Up until that point, it was constant, and I remember sometimes lying in bed at 11 o'clock at night saying, Saul, can you just stop now? Like, stop. But the challenge for him is that he'd then just think all through the night and he just couldn't turn it off.
Yeah.
I could turn it off a bit easier. I'm an avid reader, and I have to read before I go to sleep because otherwise my brain won't turn off. But now with our investment, we had to, and I in particular had to say to Saul, when we're at work, we will be the very best that we are and give the very best. But when we're at home, we're at home. Unless, of course, there's a crisis that you have to be managing, and so be it, because that's what you've got to do when you're an executive. But that has been a retraining, and it's also been a retraining of the adrenaline fight or flight, where there's a really big issue and your immediate trigger response is fight or flight, and we've had to retrain ourselves in that as well. And that was about just self-talk and reminding each other. But until that point, we had 18 years of it.
Of course, it would have been risk and those constant challenges for survival would just been part of the fabric of how you operate, I'd imagine.
Yeah, for sure.
Now, okay, well, awesome. So I keep going down rabbit holes, but sort of coming back to the thread then. So Saul's in the business. He's assumed the cheese making exercise, and you've started the tourism concept.
Tourism, yeah. So he became really general manager and oversaw all operations and cheese making. And I have no shame in saying he's a much better cheesemaker than I was and ever will be.
Why?
Because he is like a dog with a bone, and he will not relax until there's perfection.
Right.
And that's a really good thing in a cheesemaker.
Yeah.
And so from that point on, essentially it was like, here's a business with a brand. He was also very instrumental in bringing cow milk into our range, and he identified really early goat milk is too risky because it's feast or famine.
Yeah.
And so we started bringing cow milk into our range in like 2006. And by then I'd left the cheese factory in terms of operational and cheese making. And really would just remind him, okay, it's this time of the year, blah, 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 blah. So for the next sort of 2-3 years, I was just sort of on the side coaching, because by then I'm running this new business. Mm-hmm. And then pregnant with children.
Wow, so, just throw that in there.
Yeah, and also had babies, 2 girls who were only 15 months apart. And we lived on site at our cellar door in Harndorf. So that's how I was able to do babies and business, by merging them. And we just continued to grow and grow and grow. And so when I left the factory, so in 2006 to open up the cellar door as well, we were making about 2,000 litres of milk a week into cheese. And these days we do about 100,000 litres a week.
Wow.
And I never, like, seriously, if you'd said to me all those years ago, so this is what you're going to do, I'd be like, you're delusional. How am I going to do that? And even I couldn't even see getting to 10,000 litres a week, let alone 100,000. So that is, I guess, Saul's massive vision, where I can shoot for the moon, but he can shoot for the stars, because the stars are way, way further away than the moon. And I'd be like, okay, yeah, I can see that. I can do that. All right, let's do it. And so I'm really good at execution and helping him execute these amazing, really big things that I can get my head around and I'm prepared to risk for. So, yeah, we just kept growing and growing and growing. And then eventually my parents were able to go into semi-retirement when my second child was born. So that was in 2009.
Yeah.
And it just meant that they didn't have to do any more external paid work, that they could just work for the factory and draw a wage by then.
Hallelujah.
And so it just meant they were, say, working 20 or 30 hours a week, not 60 or 70.
Yeah. Brilliant. Hey, just again, sorry, jumping in there, but you're spiking sort of thoughts as we go. The big vision exercise that you touched on there with, Saul being intergalactic, whereas yourself probably being galaxy based, almost. I'm interested in just teasing out. Did Saul have this master vision of this end-to-end ecosystem from, supply, manufacturer, distribution, retail, or was it a matter of, right, okay, well, now we've got to this stage, what next? Okay.
Yeah, it was more that.
Yeah.
It was more what next, because I think that our world changes so quickly that you can have this end goal of, I just want a really successful, financially viable, great branded business.
Yeah.
And that can be your 10 to 20-year goal. But if you set the steps along the way, you can have a loose goal and you can have a loose guideline. But the truth is our world moves so quickly that if you were so dogmatic and stuck to that, you would not be in touch.
Yeah.
And I just wrote a quote down because we just finished a marketing plan yesterday. And I'm going to put this quote at the top of the plan. And it was, don't find customers for your products, find products for your customers. And that sort of resonated with me in that, yeah, you can have this big business plan and this is how I'm going to achieve this massive goal and I'm going to do this and I'm going to do that. But if the customer base is not asking for that, it's irrelevant.
Yeah, if you're not solving a customer's problem, what are you actually doing?
No. So I guess it was more each year we would come up with, this is what we're going to do this year. And it wasn't this formal marketing plan, but he and I are very big goal setters and we would verbalise them, right, we're going to do this, we're going to do that. And within 6 months we could have done it, or we thought we were going to do that, but a massive door opened and we just chose to jump through it. And so we have this, I call it this mental shelf. We've got this shelf in our brain where everything we could do sits there. So think of it as a pantry with all these jars, and it's everything we could do that we've identified, but we don't pull it off the shelf till the time is right, essentially. And the time is right when all of a sudden a customer is requesting it, or there's just these doors open so quickly, you just jump through it. So I guess that's how we've navigated 20 years of huge growth. So every year we've done between, say, 25 to 45% growth year on year on year.
Wow.
So I think our average is about 35%, and we just finished our financial year, which is a calendar year, sitting at about 30% again. So
massive.
So we're always just in growth. Yeah.
Okay.
So we just continued to grow, and my mum and dad retired. The GFC hit. We felt that. And this is the 1 year we actually didn't grow. The goat milk ran out. So thank goodness we had cow milk. And that was the year my mum got really sick. And she'd gone to a few her doctor, and the doctor kept saying, you've got a virus. And one day she arrived at my house with Dad, and I'm like, I've got a nana. I haven't got a mum anymore. And my mum was really young and vibrant. I'm like, something's wrong. And I just said to my dad, you've got to take her somewhere else.
Yep.
And so he did. And that's when we were told, you've got 3 brain tumours. And she was incredibly sick by then and died 4 months later from brain tumour. So that as a 12-month period was an incredibly hard business time, but obviously the hardest personal time in my life.
Yeah.
And the business just sort of stood still. All growth went on hold. The staff maintained, and we essentially cared for mum and dad during that period.
Yeah.
And when mum died, she was 58, my dad was 59. It was October, and that is the busiest period in our business because we're making cheese for Christmas.
Of course.
And my dad was about to turn 60, and I remember telling my mum I will oversee his 60th birthday. And I just remember I could have no time off to grieve, none. She was our bookkeeper. I had to take over all of that, and she was my paid nanny. So I had to restructure my life as much as I could to just get through.
Wow.
And I remember thinking, I've just got to get to Christmas. Just to Christmas Day, I've got to put Christmas on for the family, and then I have some time off. And I even remember my husband coming home, I think it was like the 19th of December, and he said, Sheree, so what I need you to do is blah, 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 blah. And I actually said, if you put one more thing on me, I'm going to crumble. Like I was just holding it together.
Yeah.
And then I remember sort of January and February having all these ideas of what I could do, and absolutely no motivation or drive. And so I didn't do anything other than the absolute bare necessity of what I needed to do.
Of course.
And, my girls then were 2 and 3 as well. So it was really, really full on when I look back.
Wow.
So Dad then went into – he probably just worked 20 hours a week from that point.
Yeah.
And then within a few years went into full silent partnership. And we enacted succession, and he also remarried a really lovely lady. So, he went into silent partnership. I reckon he was, I'm trying to think how old he was. I want to say he was probably 65. And I'm sure his friends from all those years ago went, I cannot believe you've done it, but not without price, not without huge prices along the way.
Massive price, and I guess that time in particular must have been challenging for all of you because your father's lost his life partner, and when you've worked that closely together, it would leave a massive hole in his life.
Yeah,
massive hole in your life too, actually, given how closely you work together.
Yeah.
I mean, if your business just went sideways, then I think you've done very well. Most would go backwards over an exercise like that. And was it just the fact that you had to keep going because without the time to grieve and sort of work through that process, it can sit there like a rock and fester away.
Yeah.
How have you sort of manoeuvred through that, Sheree?
I realised that the 12 weeks, and in particular the last 5 weeks leading up to Mum dying, I actually had already started grieving. I realised, and everyone does grief differently, and everyone does different stages of grief differently.
Yeah.
My dad and my brother did not start grieving until after she died. I knew what was happening, and I think I started grieving before she died. And so I remember each week, I wished I'd kept a journal actually, because I remember about 5 weeks leading up to her death, I had a really big issue every week, or a really big question that by the end of the week was resolved, and then I moved on to the next thing. And I was actually able to process and move through quite quickly. But if you ask me what they were, I can't remember very much, unfortunately. But I do. Yeah, I just remember that. I remember that I was able to work through some pretty big things. And it wasn't that I wasn't grieving. It's just that I just had to keep working.
Yeah.
And And in that was the grief, I guess.
Yeah, and I guess, again, the necessity kept you going. There's no choice in this. You couldn't just take time out. You just had to keep on keeping on.
Yeah.
So your father, that sort of transition out, was that something that just happened by osmosis? Or, again, was that something that you talked about and said, okay, well, here's the plan? Or did he just started to phase out because of what had happened with Estelle and then everything else?
It was very deliberate. The whole goal of Udder Delights was for Mum and Dad to retire.
Yeah.
And so it actually worked really well because obviously it was unknown how it was going to work. And we've got some great accountants, and Dad just went and saw them, and they said, Trevor, here are your options. Go and work out what resonates with you. And then we all met back together, and Dad said, here's my idea. This is how I'd like to do it. And even our accountant said, we've never heard that before, but that could work. And so that's essentially what we did. And it was, my dad said, I want to draw a percentage of what Saul draws. So whatever Saul's wage was, just a percentage of that as a silent income until the day I die. When I die, the business is Saul and Sheree's. And I will remain silent except on about 4 or 5 really quite big decisions which were documented. So that's what it was going to look like. And our accountants they said, look, this will work, and there's only ever problems with wills when people don't know what it is.
Yep.
And I have a brother, and I was like, but what about Andrew? What about my brother? And then so what Dad did is every single other possession he had, and he did have some property and a few things, was going to go to Andrew. And we all had to go in together, and the accountant said, you're both taking a risk that the property could go up or the property could go down, and the business could go up or the business could just crash and burn, and you need to go into it eyes wide open right now. And my brother and I were comfortable with that. It was easy. And that was what we did. And that was working really well. I think we had a year or 2 of that. But we also had some really full-on incidences that occurred in that. And one was that we bought for the first time ever really expensive equipment from Germany. It arrived. We'd never spent so much on equipment. And there was a part of it that was poorly made and missed their quality assurance. And it's possible it was made in Poland with cheap aluminium in hindsight. And it shredded metal into our cheese for 3 weeks.
Oh, good grief.
And we couldn't pick it up with an X-ray detector or a metal detector because of the nature of aluminium and the nature of the shavings, and ended up having to throw 3 weeks' worth of stock out. We missed out on a product recall by 1 day. It was in transit, and I was able to do an internal recall, but we lost our shelf space and our momentum in the market. So at that point, our average, we had done 35% growth for 39 months in a row.
Wow.
And when you make an insurance claim, they look at the last 3 years of financials. And so we got ready to make the insurance claim, and our business stood still that year as well. So the year my mum died, it stood still, and the year that this happened, it stood still because of the momentum that we'd lost.
Yep.
Put in the insurance claim, they're like, yeah. And then they said, just put all your financials in. And when we did, they realised how big the claim was going to be, because a business interruption claim is based on gross profit you've missed out on through your historical sales trend.
Yep.
They just freaked out. And then I had to fight them for 12 months to get the money. And that was the most, apart from due diligence, that was the hardest professional thing I've ever done.
I bet.
And very stressful, because at that point, our house deposit was funding the business cash flow. And that's where you're risking everything every day. And one thing that goes wrong that's not your fault, you can lose everything. And you've spent, 15, 20 years building this thing. So that was really, really stressful. And that was full adrenaline fight or flight for quite a long time.
Yeah.
And then paying a lawyer to help us get the money when you don't even have the money to spend on a lawyer. So 12 months later, we did get a really significant payout, and everyone could just go, but, not without its damage.
Of course.
Battle scars, I guess. And then it was coupled with my dad going on holidays as a retiree and his house in his absence being eaten by white ants, really significantly eaten. And he went to the bank to say, look, can I just get a loan to rebuild my home? I've got this passive income till the day I die. And they just said, can't loan you any money because of your age and you're retired. And so, you know, he built this business for retirement, and he was going to live in a house that was literally falling down around him. So he came to me and said, Sheree, can you buy me out? And I had just gone through this whole rigmarole of not being able to build a house because it's funding the business.
Yeah.
My husband and I in almost nervous breakdowns, and my dad saying, can you buy me out? And it's like, yeah, no. I can't risk anymore. Like, we are too highly geared in this. Like, I can't risk anymore.
Yeah.
And so that triggered our whole we need to find an investment partner. We need to get dad out, and if possible, we need to get some of Saul and I's risk off the table.
Yeah.
So that's sort of the journey that led us there.
Okay, and was Trevor or your dad's new partner in the mix at this point?
Yes, yeah, for sure. And she's just sort of, I guess, she's not involved in the business in any way, legally or other than she's a great nana to my kids and my brother's kids.
Yeah, you've mentioned on the day that I heard you talk, and you've said again today, a marvellous woman she is, and being able to say that is quite rare, Sheree.
Yeah.
To accept someone else into your life as well as his at that point in time. So,
well, I have been quite fortunate, and selfishly fortunate, I would say, that my brother remarried. He didn't have any children from a previous marriage, and my dad remarried, and they both married people, that whole, 6 degrees of separation or whatever, like we had these connections, but also neither one of them had been married or had children.
Okay.
And that's what I mean about selfishly good for me, in that the family they've come into is just our family. There's, so we haven't had any blended family issues to work through at all, because there just weren't any. So, and I do say selfishly good for me. And I guess because my stepmom missed out on children, but she's got grandkids who are legitimately hers.
Yeah, I bet she spoils them rotten and they love it too, I can imagine.
Yeah.
Hey, look, well, what I'm hearing here is I'm hearing enormous financial pressure on top of everything else, and you've got the emotional side of your dad needing to, complete what he, his journey, and you've got the insurance pressure, and then suddenly this is thrown at you. I can imagine that will be keeping both you and Saul awake at night, putting enormous pressure on everything. How did you sort of manage to manoeuvre through that?
I just call it seasons. I know in life there are seasons of pain and trauma and challenge, and that was just the season of the time. And so that when, Dad said, I want out, I need an exit, and by then my husband's now saying, I need to get out. I don't actually physically know if I'm going to survive this if I don't somehow get rid of some of this stress. And so both of them were saying to me, I want out. And so I wasn't ready. It still felt like there was unfinished business, and it was the baby, but nevertheless, my husband and dad were more important to me than the business. Yeah. So we made the decision that we were going to take it to market and find someone. So
there's an interesting decision too. Having sold a business ourselves, the decision's the easy bit. Getting to the finishing line and actually getting paid for it is a completely different scenario.
It's full on. It's full on. And really interesting, I had a friend ring me like last year, and she said, I've just decided to sell the business. I am in immense grief. And she was shocked. And I said to her that when we went to sell it, we were all sat down, and the advisor said, right, give me your best case scenario, each one of you go. And my dad's like, I want out, all gone. And my husband's like, I want out, all gone. And I'm like, I'm not ready. I don't want to get rid of it all. I think there's unfinished business, but, nevertheless, I will lead this project. And so the first month or two of leading the project, I went through grief again, and I actually had to lay the baby down and the business down. So that by the time the actual process was done, I had no grief. I was just excited because I'd already gone through it. And I was excited because I got my best case scenario as well. But yeah, selling a business, and we did choose to go global, in itself adds many challenges because we also went global.
Yep.
And we chose to put ourselves on the market globally because that was the nature of the dairy industry.
Yep.
And we were also noticing what was going on in dairy. So, so we ended up with Japanese cheesemakers, and they make cheese and yogurt and butter in Japan. They've made it for about 90 years. But what's really cool is that they own a white mould cheese factory in Australia, and they've made white mould cheese over here in New South Wales for 30 years. So they completely get and understand cheese making, white mould, which is our specialty, Australia, the Australian market and conditions. So it's just been really awesome actually to have an investment partner who knows and who understands, and you're never given a please explain because you don't need to explain because they know. So that was really good. But the actual process itself was really stressful. And I guess looking back, it was stressful for a few reasons. One was that the timeline's quite short in terms of the information that you've got to submit.
And the data room is just massive, isn't it? I don't know what.
Massive.
Incredible.
Massive.
Yeah.
And the other side of it is that the Japanese culture, I've since learned, it's a really honourable culture, and I'm really, again, glad it's Japanese. And what they say is what they mean.
Yeah.
And because what they say is what they mean, they take a really long time to say it, essentially, because they do all their research. And so what happened with our case is that because they wanted to be so sure, the due diligence and the level of due diligence was full on. And Ernst Young worked on my project, and they did the Kidman project here in Australia, the Kidman Land Project, and they said, we have never been on a project with this level of due diligence and of any size, and ours was little. And their team had about 30. I had me leading it for Udder Delights with 2 lawyers, 2 accountants and 2 EY people. But it was me feeding them the information. And so I worked till midnight most nights with a young family.
Yeah, I bet.
And, it was. And then the other stressor in it all is that the cost of due diligence, it kept getting more and more expensive for us because I just said I had 2 lawyers, 2 accountants and 2 EY. They're not a cheap profession.
No.
And you have to keep submitting information through them, and they also are the ones protecting you and ensuring that not only do you get money at the end, but that your conditions and the legal exposure you have is fair and reasonable.
Yeah.
So I remember I liken selling a business to dating, to getting engaged, to getting married, to consummation. And every single step, there's a month at least in between.
Yeah.
And I remember we weren't even married, and the bill by then was probably $200,000. And then we got married, and the bill was probably $300,000. And by the time, I call consummation actually money changing hands, the whole transaction cost us close to $500,000, and that was just out of our cash flow. So
I was going to say it's going to be a massive financial drain, but also a focus drain because you're spending so much energy responding to that which would be harming the business performance, given you're so pivotal to that. So it's very challenging.
It actually didn't harm the business performance because Saul and I, we said, let's divide and conquer.
Yeah.
And he led the business and micromanaged it in probably a very unhealthy way because if anything went wrong in the business during this process, all offers were off the table.
Of course.
And I said, right, I'll lead due diligence. I'll just oversee the cellar door, which I do anyway, and just add everything, and I'll build our house.
And build the house.
Yeah. So.
Good grief. You like to take on challenges, Sheree. I can see that.
Yeah. So.
Hey, tell me something that I'm interested in here, given that micromanagement, and obviously understand the reason for doing it, but part of the challenge that, having been through a similar situation but on a smaller scale, is maintaining the focus, dedication and commitment of the existing team. Because all the uncertainty that floods into their life, well, am I going to have a job? What's going to happen to me? Were they aware of what was happening, or how much did you take them on that journey?
They had no idea.
Wow.
So, because it was really important to us that the business just kept performing.
Of course.
So, the only one who knew was our general manager. We brought him on fully disclosing.
Yeah.
And we also made sure in his job contract he was protected if we all had to walk and at the end of this process. So, so no one felt unsettled.
Okay. They didn't smell a difference, or they just like, that's just Saul. He's a control freak.
No, that's just Saul. If it was more me and I was requesting information and I came up with some sort of term. I think I was doing a business health check or something. So that if I needed some data, I'd be like, right, I'm doing this health check. I'm getting an audit on this day. I need this. And so I would just be doing that because there was no need to make our staff feel unsettled.
No, totally.
And when I say I got my best case scenario, the investment would not occur. It was all written legally. Unless the staff stayed, unless our dairy farmers stayed, unless our customers stayed, unless Saul and I stayed, unless it stayed the same, there was no investment. And so that's how.
Yeah, and if it fell over, then it's business as usual. No one would have needed to know that even happened. So, I get that.
Either way, there was a job. But I was just really grateful because when we first went down this path, and part of the grieving for me is that we were advised that in this situation, a lot of the times a competitor will buy you, shut you down and take your brands to their facility.
Of course.
And so that's what I had to grieve, and that's what I really didn't want. So that's why I got my best at the end.
Yeah, and I guess in a way you're fortunate that the product that you produce is so reliant on what you're doing now. That's not something you can just pick up and keep the same packaging on it and call it the same thing.
Yeah, you couldn't call it Adelaide Hills
no way.
if it wasn't here,
No.
Yeah, and that was strength of branding as well.
And I think it's smart also, and what I love and admire about the Japanese culture is that they think in generations, not in years or...
Yeah.
So they take a very long-term view, and the cultural fit is the make or break when you go through what you've done. And it sounds like... not only do they understand the industry, but there's some pretty similar parallels in the style of the way you do things and the way you do things.
Yeah, the interesting thing, so they're called Snowbrand. They have got they've got subsidiaries in quite a few countries, but this is the first time they've ever bought a subsidiary and wanted the owners to keep some shares. So we had to buy 10% as well.
Okay.
So it's quite an interesting model for them as well. And I'm sure that we challenge them as much as they don't so much challenge us. I knew going eyes wide open, I knew in this new structure we would get better in terms of, I think Udder Delights was really good at everything except corporate structure in terms of reporting that really high level needed, because we've never had a board. We've never had to do the whole monthly sit down and do the formal stuff. And we've gotten really good at that. And I knew that would be the learning for me last year, and I embraced that and really enjoyed it. So in that way, we've gotten good at corporate. And in other ways of, I guess, commerciality is where they've been able to learn, and perhaps we've challenged them a bit in a good way.
Yeah. So tell me the transition from being in total control of the dynasty to being a 10% shareholder in a broader exercise. There'll be pluses and minuses. I can imagine that the financial pressure that you'd feel like this lifted off your shoulders in that breath, but in the other breath, it's like, well, it sort of is, but it sort of isn't my baby anymore.
You're right. The financial pressure is completely lifted, and that's awesome. And I have, every now and then someone says to me, do you regret it? And I'm like, not in a million years. I do not regret it at all. And I think the way I describe the business now is that the baby's just married. It actually still feels like the baby. It's just married. And when we were going through due diligence, I said to Snowbrand, look, it's completely up to you how you want to structure this. But one of the strengths of Udder Delights is its agility and its flexibility to respond to market requests and customer requests and trends and all those sorts of things. And if you slow it down with a really intricate board structure, you will lose what you've purchased.
Yep.
And you'll lose that competitive advantage.
Yep.
So as a result, I came up with a few suggestions and we sort of nutted it out together. But essentially, Udder Delights is run by a management committee. And the board only has to meet twice a year. So the management committee runs it, and the management committee is essentially our executive team and someone from Snowbrand, and still to this day someone flies out once a month from Tokyo just because they're still learning about Udder Delights.
Yep.
But we come up with a business plan each year. We come up with a budget, P&L budget, a balance sheet budget, a CapEx budget. It gets approved by head office, and then we just get on with it. So, so I guess it's that whole freedom and boundaries things. It's like, tell us what you'd like to do and do it. You know what I mean? So
yeah,
I think it's working really well.
Yeah, I can hear it in your voice. It clearly is. And I guess having lived with constant financial, emotional, physical pressure for 20 years, which is essentially what you've done with the trials and tribulations that you've been through. You must be taking a breather right now going, whew.
Yeah.
We've still got the business with at last the financial pressure is off, and the freedom that must give you in terms of, right, okay, well, there's work to be done yet, and we've now got the support to be able to make that happen. It must be pretty exciting for you, Sheree.
Yeah, it's awesome. It's really good. And we're about 18 months in, I think. Coming up 18 months in. And if you said to me, Sheree, I've got this really awesome project that you can do, and it's this and it's this and this, and you've got to start next month, I still would be a little bit fatigued. Fatigued in that I'm just really enjoying the space right now.
Yeah.
So I'm still chief executive and sales managing director, but we've negotiated really good working hours.
Great.
I'm not ready to tackle the next big, hairy, audacious thing yet. And it will come. I know it will come because my husband can't sit still.
Yeah.
But I just want another year at least, you know. So, I'm just really enjoying, again, the season of what it is. Our girls are 9 and 10. This is, I sort of think we've got 3 to 4 years of some really awesome quality time with them.
Yeah.
And I really want to make the most of that.
Enjoy it. Yeah, before you jump off the cliff and build the wings again, which is basically what you've done. Yeah, that's awesome. So just sort of pivoting slightly then, it's very obvious that you put heart and soul into investing in your business. And the benefit over 20 years, which is a full season, is now giving you the financial rewards as a consequence of that.
Yeah.
And I guess what I've seen, you know, I'm a student of success. I read everything, talk to everyone, and part of the podcast is about this. It's about sort of drawing the threads between what is sustainable success.
Yeah.
And what I've seen is that the people who achieve that don't just invest in career and income, but they do invest in assets that grow in value over time, and your business has done that.
Yeah.
You're now in a great position moving forward to continue to grow assets that will sustain and maintain and potentially improve your lifestyle outside of continuing to put full energy into Udder Delights. Are there other passive investment vehicles that you'll start to consider or do more of now?
Yeah, so we still own the Udder Delights cheese cellar. That wasn't part of the deal, and that's in a licensing agreement. And that is a nice passive income. But years ago, we read Rich Dad, Poor Dad, and that was all about letting your assets buy your liabilities. and he considered an asset something that put money in your pocket, and a liability something that took money out of your pocket. And so a family home, by that definition, will always be a liability. Unless you've got an Airbnb on it, it will never bring money back into your pocket. And so we read that when we were, I reckon, 26, 27, and we decided that we were going to do that. So while we sold a house to start the Udder Delights cheese cellar, we then lived on site. And I thought we'd live on site for, say, 3 years and then go back into a family home. And we ended up living on site in the equivalent of a bed and breakfast for 12 years. And we chose that because while we were living there, our asset was buying more assets. And so we had no living expenses and just saved and saved and saved, and ended up getting a few investment properties under our belt.
Right.
And then when we said, and the line in the sand for me was, Saul, by the time I'm 40, I want a house. Like, otherwise we just would have continued to buy other houses or business. And it's like, there's always, you just can't keep doing that. You still got to live for now. So the line in the sand was, we are going to start saving for our own home, which will not be it's an asset, but, it's not going to ever put money back into our pocket until we sell.
No.
So then we started doing that, but we were just able to chunk down such a huge amount of deposit and cash payment because we were living at our shop. And that was the sacrifice we paid, and we chose to pay it because we knew that the payoff would be better.
Love it.
So, so we've got a few investment properties, our house, and then I decided last year that I was going to learn the share market.
Of course.
So I I'm learning there's different, obviously, philosophies to real estate and shares, and I am using the barefoot investor philosophy on the share market.
Yep.
And I've really enjoyed it, and it's a terrible time in the share market, but I'm still really enjoying it, and I'm enjoying learning about it, and I'm still getting a return. But also that's that whole, hold for a long time. It's not just the quick fix. Nothing. If it's too good to be true, it's usually too good to be true.
Absolutely. Yeah, and I 100% agree there. Okay, so sort of drawing that massive journey that you've had, and one that very few would survive their way through, lessons learned, what are the takeaways that the listeners could take from that very tumultuous journey so far?
I've got like 20 probably, but I'm not going to give them full because it would take too long. Absolutely know your numbers is, to me, empirical, essential, and if you're not managing the numbers and monitoring and knowing what they're doing, your business will not survive. And I think a lot of people, just whether it's in business or life, they get this mental block with maths. And I think the mental block actually comes from some time at school where they had a really bad maths teacher who just couldn't communicate in a way that they could understand. And then you get the mental block of, I'm not good at maths, which then translates to, I'm not good at money, which then translates to, I can't do this, I won't look at it, I'll let someone else do it. Do you know what I mean? So I'm just such a big advocate of, you can be good at maths and you can be good at money, and those numbers, when they're to do with your business and your personal finances, are real numbers, and they're alive and they're exciting and they empower, and you can make changes because of them. So the first time I chose to take control of numbers was probably 2 years in. I did a huge analysis on the cost of our cheese and realised our number one bestseller was selling at 10% loss. Really demoralising and embarrassing and humiliating. And then when I got over that, I just decided I'd get on with it and do something about it. So that's something that I'm quite passionate about. The other one would be that business is always the unknown, and you get this new project that you've got to do, and there's no one else who actually can do it because you don't have enough money to pay someone. So you have to do it. And I know that when Saul first came on, sometimes he'd come home and he'd go, oh, so I've got to do this. I'm like, yep. And he's like, I'm not really sure how. I'm like, yep. Oh, so can you? And I'm like, no, it's your job. Get on with it then, you know. And so I sort of feel like in my life, to this day, I still get it. So yesterday in our marketing plan, I've decided I'm going to take something on, which I actually have no idea how to do. But I think I'm just used to that. And I just say to myself, get on with it then, you know. So it's just that whole getting over the mental block again. It's always mental blocks of just, I don't know how to do it, but I'll learn, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
So, and actually I wrote down this proverb. I want to memorize this one because I really like it, but it's a Chinese proverb, and it says, the person who says it cannot be done should not interrupt the person doing it.
Love it.
Yeah, and most people say it can't be done, and the truth is sometimes Saul or I will have an idea and the other one goes, no, as if we can do that. And it's like you have to eat your words because, you know, if you think you can't, you can't, and if you think you can, you can.
Absolutely, so true. Beautiful lead into the ambush session now, Sheree, which is just 5 simple questions that the audience constantly comes back to me on. So I would love your thoughts around these.
Yeah.
And kicking straight in, and you've touched on a few of these already, but your favourite quote and why? That's probably it. But
no, I have another one actually.
Okay.
I think my favourite quote is, don't envy what someone has because you don't know the price that they've paid.
Oh, that's gold. Yeah, that needs no explanation.
Oh, yeah. I don't know. I hate people saying, oh, you're so lucky, or I don't know, I'm just really jealous. And it's like you actually don't know the cost that's been involved.
I don't believe in luck. You only get lucky if you work hard enough is my belief. Yeah. And those that make that statement really have no comprehension of the blood, sweat and tears that have gone into getting that result.
Yeah.
100%. You've mentioned a couple of books on the journey, but the top one that you'd recommend people have a read and why?
I think the top book that shaped me, it was actually Rich Dad, Poor Dad, because it shaped how we managed money and what we chose to invest our money in the early days.
Yeah. I'm sitting here doing this because of Rich Dad, Poor Dad.
Yeah, right.
It was an absolute game changer and a light bulb for me.
Yeah.
Awesome. This one's a little bit left field, but it's something that a lot of Australians feel strongly about. What's the top thing that you've legally done to pay less tax?
I just think a lot of trust structures is probably how we've done that. And while we operate our businesses from companies, we have corporate trustees of companies. So the company is a corporate trustee of the trust. So we've just I really like trust structures. And even when we went to sell our business, one of the first questions was, how does our structure look for if we're going to sell? And then when we looked at it, we were in the perfect structure needed to mitigate tax for the sale, because you pay a huge amount on a sale.
Of course you do. And, hallelujah to great accountants.
Yeah.
Yeah, love that. Back on the investment track, what's both the worst and the best piece of investment advice that you've ever received, Sheree?
I've got to say the best piece of investment would probably still go back to Rich Dad, Poor Dad, in terms of really understanding what his definition is of an asset and a liability, and therefore getting your assets to buy your liabilities, continues to shape us and is even shaping us now in how we're making some of our financial decisions. The worst piece of investment advice, I think my husband and I are pretty good at sniffing through the dodginess, and we just, I don't know, I can't remember because we just throw it out so quickly. Other than when you hear of all these schemes, get rich quick, there's just no such thing.
No.
So for us, if it's too good to be true, it's too good to be true, you know. So I don't really feel like there's one that's resonated with me.
Yeah, you've got the finely tuned BS detector to be able to reject that straight away. Yeah. Awesome. All right, and just to close on that then, a personal habit that you believe contributes to your success? Yeah,
and I touched on this too, but I just think it's that continually open to taking on a new thing and a new challenge, which I actually don't know how to do. And I get pleasure in that. So last year I did, and it is an ongoing journey of, okay, this year I'm going to learn about share market. You know, and every year I want to get better at financial management. I have never done a financial course and almost operate, you know, at that CFO level and really enjoy it. So for me, it's just always learning something new. Another goal I set myself this year is to cook one new recipe every week, you know. So it's just, I just like new things, I think. And if you're open to new things and change, that's just business, and that's how it grows and develops.
Well, that's life, actually. If we're not growing, we're dying. There's not much in between, really. No, that's awesome. Okay, sort of bringing it to a close now then, if you spoke to a school leave, let's say your daughter is about to leave school.
Yeah.
What will you advise her to invest her time, money and skills in to create her version of freedom? I am a really big advocate of just being the very best you, and hate comparison. I recently spoke at an event and then got a letter from a mother who sent her adult daughter there as a gift to her because she had just gotten over cancer and her husband had just gotten over cancer. Right. And her daughter had gotten home, and the mum said she's really happy, but she's also really sad because she says her life is just so boring compared to yours. And to me, that was like a punch in the guts. And I'm like, I can't believe even someone who's gone through cancer and watching my mum die through cancer, the truth is the best gift in life is health and life. And I think that I call it the comparison curse, that if you just compare, it leads you nowhere. All it leads you is down. And so I guess I want to, and I tell them already that I just want them to be the very best that they can be, and that if I can get them on a journey where they're doing what they're naturally good at, because generally your talent's what you're naturally good at and you can become excellent at, and they can generate an income from that, then that's awesome. And I really don't care what that is. Like, you know, there's just no pressure. If they want to go to uni, they can go to uni. If they don't want to go, they don't have to go, but they have to do something. You know what I mean? So if they don't end up going to uni, I'll put them in a business school, or they'll do a trade and then they'll learn the business. Or so, yeah. They've been watching me read Barefoot Investor, and they're like, what does investing mean, Mum? And I've even shown them, and I've shown them compound interest. And, you know, I'm like, so girls, I don't really care what you do, but the number one thing I'm going to teach you is don't ever earn more than you spend in any enterprise that you happen to do. Love it. Absolute God. And I can almost hear Trevor's legacy living on in you there, Sheree. It sounds like the sort of, it mightn't have been as well enunciated as you just have, but I hear a lot of what you've just said in and how he's allowed you to blossom in your journey. Yeah. Look, it's been really very insightful. You've been very open and shared tremendously with us. I think everyone's going to take a lot out of understanding just how much commitment needs to be put into achieving long-term success. I wish you every ongoing success, Sheree, and have no doubt that will come your way given your love and approach and dedication to life. So thanks for spending some time with me on Get Invested.
No worries, my pleasure. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Sheree. Well, freedom fighters, how good was that? To get a summary of all this investment gold in the show notes, just email me on hello@khgroup.com.au. That's HELLO@khgroup.com.au. Or check us out at www.bushymartin.com.au/Get Invested. I look forward to joining you next week for another episode of the Get Invested podcast. So thanks for listening, and as always, dream as if you live forever and live as if you'll die tomorrow.